Namaste, welcome everyone to our fortnightly author Q&A hosted by Indic Book Club and Indic Academy. Today we have our chief curator, Abhinav Agarwal, a software professional and an IIM graduate and a very satisfied author of Predators and Prey. I hope it's visible the normal way. Uh, yeah, so it's a very gripping novel. Best-selling author Ashwin Sanghi opines that it's interesting and intriguing. Make no mistake, the predator is Abhinav Agrawal and the reader is the prey. A gripping and engrossing thriller that cannot be put down until the last page, says Dr. Vivek Debroy, economist and author. So that is the kind of accolades that Predators and Prey, the very first book of Abhinav Agrawal, garnered. It's available on Amazon. It's even available on Kindle Unlimited, right, Abhinav?
Correct.
So, welcome, Abhinav.
Thank you, Sai. It's a delight to be here. And, after doing all of these Indic Book Club Q&As, it feels very awkward to be on the other side. And yeah, all I can request is, ask me easy questions.
So, wait, we'll try to set the question paper within the syllabus. Yeah. So, Abhinav, I know this is a very generic question, but that is what piques the interest of many aspiring writers out there. What made a software professional and, who's into management turn to writing this kind of a thriller, eh, which has spy tech, espionage, and this Mahabharata and philosophy put in?
Uh, See, before I was a software professional, before I did my MBA engineering, I was a reader. I think from the time I was 5, 6, 7, I don't know how many years old, I always loved reading. And in English literature, my interest was crime and mystery and thrillers. So, Arthur Conan Doyle and Agatha Christie. And then as I grew up, more than Alistair MacLean and Frederick Forsyth and Robert Ludlum. And then over the last, 10 years or so, it's been, Dan Brown and Lee Child and, these kinds of, so thrillers has always been something that, I loved reading. And in 2017, it started off as, initially I wanted to write something nonfiction on the impact of surveillance and privacy and all of those things. And the origins of that were that I was a fairly harsh critic of how data privacy was being eroded through all of these technology advances, and we were not as a society, as a nation, fully aware of those things. And I struggled with it for a little while. And then on a lark, I said, let me try and write a small passage, those typical chase scenes that you read, that you see in the movies, that you read in thrillers and all. And I said, let me try and write something that would, measure up to the best of those chase scenes. That, frankly, is how I started. And in fact, that's how the book also begins in the prologue. I think the third part section of the prologue, where, he ran like his life depended on it. That is actually in, I think if I remember, those were the very first words I wrote when I started writing this book. And then it grew into this thought that, can I weave what I wanted to talk about, privacy, surveillance, and intrigue, into a fiction thriller? And that's how it began, essentially.
So fiction has its way of drawing the reader right in. So I was just in a slightly unrelated, on a slightly unrelated note. Somebody was asking about storytellers of my genre, the Puranic fiction, as to how I am different from, how a storyteller is different from the Rishi, and what is the dharma of a storyteller. So I always felt that the readers of stories, they seek to connect, and they don't want to learn, but they seek to connect. And our dharma as a storyteller is to give them that connect as well as the learning, if we can.
That is, I think that's so nicely put, because uh, if I wanted to write something for my own, consumption, so to say, I would write and put it up as a blog post. But I
Yep.
wanted to also write something that would engage with the reader, which would
Mm.
appeal to the reader, uh, which they would want to, in the truest sense of the word, and it's a cliche, but it's like they would want to keep turning the page to see what happens next, what happens next. So it was both that I'm not writing a book for my own sake. Of course I am, at some level I want to do that. I want to tell a story. I think I can tell a story, but also I want it to be read. I want people to read and say that, wow, this is great, this is good.
Mm.
And that these were the two balancing interests. So writing the story was one thing, and then making it appealing, engaging, all of the things that people, that authors keep giving advice on, have
Mm.
make it a page turner, keep it gripping, avoid XYZ, do ABC. I think I tried to follow all of that.
I mean, it shows, not to exactly flatter you, but it shows. The pages keep turning themselves, and so
No,
that really,
I'll take all flattery I can get. I have no problems with that.
no, yeah, you deserve it.
Thank
Okay, so that brings me to my next question. So, especially when you want to put together this content-rich fiction, right? It's almost like writing three non-fiction books. The work that is required, the research that is required, right? So, you have to research into the spy tech, you have to research into the intelligence, that the way intelligence functions, the mafia who is connected to these industries, and then there's media industry. So basically you would have covered at least seven to eight industries or organizations at national and international level. So tell us more about the research that has gone into.
you. So, see, when it comes to technology, I had an edge over other areas, because that's what I've been working in, and I've been working in the area of data, and I do like reading up a lot about smartphones and technology. But when it came to other things, I had very very little to go on, and I would say that. Uh, Google was my biggest research assistant. It was my free unpaid research assistant, and sometimes I would actually get worried, in the sense that if someone were to see my Google search history, it would reveal a portrait of a very disturbed, almost a psychopath. To give you an example, uh, I think one of my Google queries was, which bone of the neck has to be broken for a person to die? Uh, it basically came down to such levels of disturbing searches in it, or what happens when you stab someone in the throat. So, but the good thing is that at least that gave me a sense of it gave me the feeling that what I was writing about was actually possible. I wasn't just putting in a line that he punched this guy and the guy fell down dead. Yes, that is the beginning and the end, but wanted to bring in some more details. Or when talking about the National Security Agency of the US and what kind of data surveillance it does, what kind of a footprint it has, what kind of technological resources it has. Again, there's a ton of material available on the internet, and we have to be in some ways thankful to Edward Snowden, who leaked all of these documents, and Glenn Greenwald, who published a book on those leaks, which give us a very very inside look, a frightening level of detail into the kinds of surveillance the NSA does. So the internet really helped bring all of that together, but and then in some ways it even became sort of at some points it became an obsession with level of detail. For example, I on a lark, I Googled and I found out how much of pressure you need to apply to the trigger of a Glock gun, and how much distance, how many millimeters the trigger has to travel before the bullet will explode, and at what speed the bullet will explode. So that's what it was.
So basically, you need to visualize it at a level before we can, put it on paper or the Word doc.
That's very true. I wrote what I could visualize, or the things that I could not visualize, I had to, I still had, it was a very visual experience, writing. I mean, if I may put it that way, everything was visual. So in some cases, it becomes a very disturbing experience. In other cases, it was, an enjoyable part, but the intent was to make it believable.
Yeah. Oh, that's one thing that fiction does not enjoy the same privilege as non-fiction does. Non-fiction can sound weird. It has total right to sound weird and unrealistic, but fiction has to sound realistic. So we have that constraint on us.
That's
Uh,
ironical.
yeah. So going into those believable details, Abhinav, there's one particular, I think, a couple of particular wonderfully written passages about what you call as Delhi Darbar. Right, I am sure the viewers would love you to read out those paragraphs and tell us more about Delhi Darbar.
The Delhi Darbar is India's version of the deep state, if you may. I mean, if I were to put it in a sentence, in one line, the Delhi Darbar is India's version of the deep state, and it represents a collection, an unofficial collection, agglomeration, if you may call it, of politicians, bureaucrats, industrialists, media personnel now in recent times, which wield the real power behind the government and the facade that you see. And we often enough, inadvertently get to see glimpses of the power that the Delhi Darbar wields. Some person will be arrested on charges of whatever is grievous crime, and overnight someone will make a representation to the Supreme Court, and a midnight hearing will be held, and the person will be released on bail. And we, as a common man, we have absolutely no understanding how is it that our judiciary can be so overworked and backlogged with 40 lakh or 4 crore cases or whatever that number is, and yet certain people are able to get a hearing on demand almost with the highest court of the country. And it it leads to a lot of speculation. It leads to conspiracy theories. And the Delhi Darbar, frankly, for all I know, it may not even exist, but I think as a construct around which to create a fiction thriller conspiracy theory, I think it's simply irresistible.
No, but
So
what you say is right. We have had midnight hearings for a terrorist, and someone has to struggle for days, even without a charge sheet or an FIR. Someone has to struggle for days and years. So it's not exactly. We cannot exactly dismiss the presence of Delhi Darbar. They may call it by some other name. So
correct.
I
And
think we have some time. So, but I really want the viewers and your prospective readers to hear out those paragraphs.
so, okay, let me give a brief, what do you call, a background into what I think you're referring to. And if you go to page 160, so essentially a little bit of background I think would be useful. So
Yes.
the protagonist is this fellow Jaswant Singh Rathore, known as JSR, and he's the national security advisor to to the prime minister in India, and a very powerful person, obviously. And his antagonist is a media baron by the name of Neeraj. And there is a scene towards somewhere towards the middle of the book where the two meet, and there's a showdown of sorts, and there's a discussion that is going on. And I'll start off with, so basically Rathor gives Neeraj an ultimatum and he says you have to basically, stop your crooked ways and do XYZ and so on, and that's your only hope of avoiding jail time and for whatever reasons. And Neeraj has no intentions of doing it, and I say that his strategy was shock and awe. So he wanted to try that with the Rathor. So here's where he starts. So essentially, Rathor ends with saying that one at a time, Neeraj, one dirty, filthy, corrupt pig at a time. First, I will deal with you, then with the other swine, brokers, hustlers, and pimps who come in your wake. You had this last chance to bow out with your dignity and liberty intact. You will lose both now. And this sort of, doesn't go down well with Neeraj, obviously, because being called so many bad names. And he then starts off. He says, Rathor Saab, Neeraj started. We all know Panchatantra stories. Since you have shared a story, allow me to share a page from the annals of history. This is Lutyens, this is Delhi, the capital of dynasties for 1,000 years. Kings have sat on the throne and reigned, but rarely ruled. The real ruler behind the imperial throne has been the Delhi Darbar. Even today, while the Prime Minister reigns, it is the Delhi Darbar that rules this country. People like me, who you think of as the parasites, the brokers, the middlemen, are the Delhi Darbar. We were there when the Khiljis took over. It was someone like us who invited Babur to overthrow Ibrahim Lodi. We are the Sayyid brothers who ran Farooq Siyar's Mughal court. When he got out of line, it was us who had him deposed, thrown in prison, poisoned, and finally strangled to death. We were the ones that betrayed Bhagat Singh to the gallows and built Lutyens as a reward brick by brick. Every such brick in Lutyens today will tell you a tale, Rathor Saab, if you care to ask or listen. It is the tale of the invincibility and immortality of the Darbar. Dynasties have been born and dynasties have died here. Invaders have come and gone. Prime ministers have come and prime ministers have moved on. We, on the other hand, Sirji, have been the only constant in this land for 1,000 years. As long as there exists a nation to rule, we will be here to decide who that ruler is. You touch me, and it is your king, the prime minister, who will fall. Even he knows this, which is why he will never allow you to act against us. I'm surprised that you, a supposedly wise man, doesn't know this. Your name, power, and existence will be ground to dust and will swirl around the shoes of men like us before being forgotten forever. Neeraj paused, shock and awe. Despite himself, JSR felt a cold chill run through him at Neeraj's words. And the second part is on page 164, where Neeraj continues. He says, I fear you overestimate your abilities, but do not confuse me for a single person. I and others like me are the Raktbij against whom no Durga, no Kali exists. There are no gods in Kalyug, Rathor Saab, only people like me, more powerful than any god you pray to. I am a man of patience, but do not test its limits. Neeraj concluded his message in a monotone, a neutral voice that carried not a trace of emotion. For all the bombast Neeraj had thrown in, JSR recognized the kernel of truth hidden under that bravado. Neeraj was but a face that changed shape at will, that stood for the brutal truth about longevity and survival and power in Delhi. The Delhi Darbar was an eternal whorehouse with pimps, whores, and customers. Rathor was no more than a constable in this whorehouse. He could watch, even choose to participate in the bazaar, but he did not have permission to disrupt the market. Those who did were replaced. In that moment, JSR knew this was a war he could not win. He had to make a choice. This was not how he had anticipated the meeting would go on.
That was amazing. I keep on quoting this to some of the, my writing mentees as to how to
Oh,
visualize dialogue.
oh wow.
Yep, So it's visually very rich, as well as I could hear the dialogues being exchanged between the two characters, right? So that brings me to the craft part of your writing, right? So basically, the thriller scene is filled with a lot of these run and chase and run storylines that doesn't require a lot of the reader to engage with his brains on. It's basically the protagonist is either he's being chased or he's on in a pursuit, and he's out to save the world is in danger, whatever, some bomb blast, anything. So but and that pace is very important for the reader, right? Because most of the time they choose to read it over a journey or overnight, or in between two things. And so but the challenge I see is in fitting this kind of beautiful content rich pieces. So how do you manage to balance them?
Uh, Gosh, I see. One is that I, and okay, so you asked me about the craft, and I think one of my biggest learnings during the writing of the book itself was to read out passages to myself after I had written them. And that helped. I can't even begin to tell you how much it helped, because
Yep.
many times when I would read something, it would feel awkward. It would feel like it wasn't flowing well.
Hmm.
The dialogue also, right? So one is the narration, the description pieces, and the other one was the dialogue.
Hmm.
The dialogue would also feel like, if you have to be able to imagine and visualize the characters speaking the dialogue. So uh, the voices have to be different for the two characters or whoever is
Yes.
speaking.
Yes.
You cannot paint everyone's dialogue with the same paint or the same stroke of brush and all, because
Hmm.
everyone has a personality and their
Yep.
dialogue has to reflect that.
Hmm.
And if it didn't feel that way, then I would go back and rewrite. I would delete stuff. I would To give you a sense, the final published version edition is about 88,000 words, 88 to 89,000 words.
Hmm.
When I first finished the draft and I said, I'm done, there's nothing more to add to the book, it was at 110,000 words. So I ended up deleting, net deletion of what, about 20,000 words. And I think that was the best 20,000 words I deleted, because I want to have my book as long as possible, because every word I write, I think, is the best word anyone could have written. But, as I said, if I were writing a book for myself, perhaps yes, but the reader may not have such patience, where if I have said something on page 10, I don't want to repeat it on page 50 and again on 100. And I don't want to fall in love with the sound or the look and feel of my own words.
Yes. Sure. So before I go to my next question, guys who are watching this, feel free to put in your questions on the chat. I'd take them. We'll take them towards the end of our session. I have a good couple of questions to go before I open up the floor. Uh, your main protagonist, Abhinav, that is Devavrata Jata Shankar Singh, right? Shaitan.
Correct.
His other name is Shaitan. So, like in Predators and Prey, he brings us all a lot of lessons about spy tech. I really have to be, I am conscious whenever I use my phone. So does Shaitan have any other truths to reveal in your future books? Some more additional education that he would like to give the readers, and or in other words, any peek into your next book.
Oh, gosh. So in terms of surveillance technology, I think pretty much most of what I had to say, I put in Predators and Prey.
Mm.
Uh, Again, it's not as if technology and surveillance, means of surveillance are not going to be there. They're ever present.
Yeah, there you
But in terms of writing the second book, I think I wouldn't want to use surveillance as the bedrock on which the novel is built. Having said that, I think there are at least three or four areas that I wanted to explore in the book itself, but I don't think I had enough space, because I really couldn't write a war and peace and expect any publisher on the earth, face of the earth, to publish a 1,000-page book.
Yeah.
So I had to leave a lot of things out. To give you a sense of some of those things, one is, Deva's as yet unexacted revenge against Rana.
Yeah.
That is one thing that I definitely want to explore. The second one is, and after writing the book, I think my daughter told me that both JSR and Neeraj's characters are very strong characters. And it got
Mm.
me thinking that there might be, it just might be interesting to explore their parallel paths as they rose to, their respective positions of eminence and power.
Mm.
The third one itself is there are a couple of loose ends in the book that I left loose deliberately. So I want to explore those also. And I mention in one place this encounter, this particularly nasty encounter between Praveen and Ria.
Yeah.
And that got me thinking that there is something there also to be explored, because I have hinted at it, but I have not talked anything more about it. So all of these things are going through my mind. As far as this immediate second book goes, I want it to be a sort of a continuation from where the first book ends up,
Mm.
and then taking it into a couple of different subplots. And the reason I'm not hiding any details, but the sad reality is that I am about, I think, only 30-40% of my way through. And I'm a distracted writer. I should have been long done with my book, the second manuscript, by now.
That kind of splits me into two. As a writer, I can so sympathize with the the struggle of the progress of the manuscript, but as a reader, I'm just selfish.
Oh, I know, I know. I'm
So
selfish too, because I want to write the third and the fourth and the fifth one, and I'm hoping and assuming that there'll be publishers out there who will want to publish this. So I want to get the second book done and then move to the third. But I wish I had a magic pill or an injection to like a COVID vaccine to vaccinate me against distractions.
or some wormhole into Narnia or something, that
Or that too,
sometimes
exactly.
relative time.
Exactly.
Okay, so that comes to you mentioned about publishing. Now, how what was your experience with the publishing world? Because first book, it is always a struggle. Second book, we get used to the struggle. I mean, so but
I
what was your experience? What was your journey?
It was a journey of awakening, of rude shocks, of my ego, getting a little flattened and then a lot flattened. So when I started the book, or somewhere, I think I was under the impression that all I had to do was write a book, and publishers would be lining up, at my door to say, Abhinav, where were you? Gosh, you're Dan Brown and Jeffrey Archer and Frederick Forsyth combined. You are it. So that was where I began from. And by the time I had finished the book and a few months had passed and all, I could lay claim to having been rejected by every single tier one publisher in India.
Wow.
In fact, despite in a couple of instances, there are some very, very good, prominent authors who made personal recommendations, and even that was not enough to convince the publishers that my book deserved, to be published. So that was a rude awakening. And then I got, or I was introduced to Tree Shade Books, which has been started by Vineet Bajpayee, who wrote the Harappa trilogy.
Yeah.
And once they agreed to publish my book, the experience was simply fabulous. That's, I think that's the only word I can use to describe it. And obviously, being my first book, I learned a lot of things about what goes from the time you submit your Word document to a publisher to the time you actually see, the galley, or I forget the name that is used to describe those first prints. And at every step of the way, it was just an amazing experience with Tree Shade. They assigned an amazing editor to work on my manuscript. The feedback came back in time, very good feedback. There was no, I was not asked to change anything in my book. I've heard stories about how, at some publishers, authors are asked to change something to make them more ideologically compatible with with whatever. None of that happened. And the publication, from the time I submitted the manuscript to the time it appeared on Amazon, was I think about, I don't know, about 6 months or so, which I'm told is an amazingly short period of time.
Wow, that's an eye opener. So I'm not new to this experience because I was, when I was done with my first book, I already had such a bad experience with a certain literary agent that I just, I was not ready to go through this and chose the self-publishing route, and that was a different journey altogether. So there are questions coming up from the viewers. So before I just one more question before we open the floor for questions. So you are the chief curator of Indic Book Club, and I'm sure there are a lot of aspiring writers and authors who are watching this and who would catch the recording later. So maybe you could tell us your role as the curator and how the platform built itself and grew to whatever it is today. Because Indic Academy has been a launch pad to many writers starting, from its inflection point. It has just, it's grown into a grove of very promising writers. So what has been your role and your experience in?
So I was very, I think, fortunate to get involved with Indic Academy and then with Indic Book Club from 2015 onwards. And uh, in a nutshell, Indic Book Club is a platform, right? It's a platform for uh, providing a platform for discussions around books, to bring readers and authors and writers together on a platform, and to also provide a venue for upcoming and Indic authors to promote their work, to get the word out, and so on. Because uh, one of the key takeaways that I had as a first time author was that no matter how difficult writing a book itself may be, for a first time author, for an unknown author, and someone who's not writing about controversial topics that we come across, it is very difficult to promote your book and to get the word out. And with literally tens of thousands of books being published in India every year, yours is just my book is just one in 10,000 books that are going to be published in a year. And we as authors, I think, often forget that, and we assume that people will automatically discover our books and then spread the word. But the reality is that people have a finite attention span. People, which is why it is important to amplify voices, amplify news and information about the good upcoming books and authors. And I think Indic Book Club tries to do that. We are still a small community. Our Facebook group started, you and I started that just about 3 months back, but we have got more than 2,000 people as part of the group. They're taking part in discussions, they're sharing things about their books, and we are finding out that so many authors who are finding the Indic Book Club platform as a way to get the word out about their books. So all I do is just let people know that there is this platform available, and I uh, yeah.
So Abhinav is just being very, very humble and economic with the real role he plays, guys. So he basically pushes everything from idea to execution. Keeps chasing people to get the flyers done, to get it shared on social media, to spread the word. Then arranges the giveaways that grows our Facebook group. So do please check out the Indic Book Club Facebook group. We have really lively discussions there. Hoping to see a lot of you join the Facebook group, and we have a lot of programs for upcoming writers, calls for anthologies, papers, and whatnot. So please follow us everywhere. Indica Academy, hashtag Indica on Twitter, and Indica Academy on, and Indic Book Club on Facebook. So thank you. I had to steal that platform, Abhinav, to announce about various activities.
No,
So
no, absolutely.
yeah. So now I'm going to the audience questions. So Ajay Sudami, he has a question which has pretty much, I was having since the session began. How safe is our Aadhaar data? Or how difficult is it to hack into Aadhaar database? My Aadhaar card is totally outdated, so should I update it or not?
Gosh, I can get into trouble by being blunt, so I will not be blunt. There is no data, there is no database that cannot be hacked. That's the bottom line, firstly. Everything and anything has been hacked. If you look at private companies, some of the biggest companies in the world, like Sony, they had their entire server hacked. If you look at multinationals, Fortune 500 companies, their servers and databases have been hacked. If you look at the US government, Snowden leaked millions and millions of documents.
Yep.
That was a hack in a manner of speaking. Just 2 weeks back, one of the largest online grocery platforms in India, a unicorn startup, its database of customer names and email addresses and whatnot was hacked and put up on the dark web for sale. So if someone comes and says this database is secure, it cannot be hacked, I'm sorry, they are technologically illiterate. They don't have the faintest clue what they're talking about. So if someone says that our database is secured behind 6 feet thick walls of concrete, the best thing that you could request the government to do is to fire that person.
Wow, that opens up, maybe we just have to live with the vulnerabilities out there. There's
we
no
we have to.
solution.
So take another instance. For example, I don't name any company in my book because every company is doing that, but almost every app that you have on your phone, your phones, your smartphones, operating system manufacturer, they all have the ability to activate your microphone, your camera at any point in time. There have been vulnerabilities disclosed, and companies have come back and said, oops, it was a software bug. We were recording your conversations, but we didn't do it by, it's that classic tone that these companies, and I'm talking about some of the largest companies in the world, they'll say, essentially, once they're caught doing stuff that they shouldn't have been, they'll say, galti se mistake ho gaya. And that's the end of the story. And so almost everything that I talk about in my book has actually happened. Almost everything I talk about, there are instances that have happened. Your location being tracked, yes. If you switch off your phone, you can still be tracked. If you upload anything, if you take a photo, if you record a video, that video and photograph is uploaded to some cloud server by your app, and that server is vulnerable. Or in some cases, as we found out through the NSA leaks by Snowden, any email communication, videos, and all of that, one part goes to the company, the other part goes to the NSA. So this is not fiction. This is not hype. This is not exaggeration. This is not a distortion. This is actually happening, and it's been happening for at least 8 or 10 years or longer.
Wow. So that's chilling, to say the least, Abhinav. So, it's like, so by adapting technology, we have totally given the power over us to these two, giants, and they can do whatever they want with.
Oh, absolutely. And we all know so many scandals keep surfacing. So let no one tell you that your data is safe and secure. That is only a relative word.
So if somebody wants to target you, then we just need to turn into Devavrata.
Unfortunately, the only way to keep, and that's a whole other topic, but there is no way to hide essentially, from surveillance.
Sure. So, well, I mean, that will stay with me for a while. But let me move on to next question from Professor Ramesh Rao. Thank you for following this, sir. So he says, I'm not much of a blood, gore, sex fan in thrillers, more of a smiley Le Carre fan. Could you tell us more about the approach to writing these thrillers that can appeal to the head more than the heart and guts?
So the good thing is that even though there is a fair amount of killing in my book, I think it probably occupies a total of 5 pages, and the gore and the other sex part I think is another 2 or 3 pages out of 360. So I'm very happy I kept that to a minimum. My kids would have preferred I didn't have any of that, especially bones being broken and necks being snapped. But hey, I'm a thriller writer. I love thrillers. I cannot write a book which doesn't have these elements in it. But having said that, you know, you a book has to be more than just these elements, right? You cannot have a murder happening every 2 pages. You cannot have, quarts and bottles of blood, oozing out every fifth page. It gets very, very tiring after a point, right? So my goal was, what is the story? And the story has to start from someplace. There, the classic elements of a story, right? You have to have a start, you have to have some inciting incident, you have to have some obstacles placed in the path, you have to really, really stack up the odds against the protagonist, and then figure out a way to make the protagonist overcome those obstacles in a way that is at least believable to the reader, right? The reader should not think that uh, Superman could have am I reading about a human, am I reading about Superman? So it has to have an element of believability to it. So the way to do that is, okay, can this really happen? And then can I add 10, 20, 30% to it because I'm writing fiction.
Sure. So that's mixing art with reality, basically. Craft is. So thank you. I mean, that brings me to, if I can share with the aspiring authors out there, there's this there's this author called Nick Stephenson who broke down this elements of craft, and he explains each of the genres, how it is relevant to every genre, irrespective of whether it's a romance or a thriller or a fantasy, out of the world fantasy. So he says he starts with something like a introduction of the character and a game changer. That's your inciting event, basically, which throws him out of the your a life like you and I are having. And then there is a reactive phase where he keeps fighting. I mean, he doesn't know where they are coming from, all the dangers and whatever is happening, but he's in this reactive phase, which makes him grow from a normal person to a hero. And after that, the antagonist springs into action, showing that he's the boss. So that is the second game changer. And after which the hero goes into the protagonist, he or she goes into this proactive learning and proactive mode, after which we set the final conflict. And I guess your story just followed that that arc, whether you knew it or not. It's kind of.
To be frank, I didn't. The weird or the funny thing is that I read up a lot of things about writing after I was more than halfway or almost towards the end of my book, which is kind of the wrong way of going about writing a book, which also in hindsight tells me I had to delete a lot of words and all. But I think in the end, any good fiction thriller will follow the template that you mentioned. That it's got to have an arc, it's got to have these pivotal moments, and I think that's what I ended up doing. So I'll read out in the Q&A. There are a couple of questions that have come.
Oh, there's another Q&A. Okay, okay. Yep.
So one is by Ram, and he asks, how much time did you spend in research, writing, and editing? That's a very good question. So if you just look at the writing part of it, right? You know, you can say that if I wrote 110,000 words in the first manuscript, and my average writing speed would have been anywhere between 500 to 1,000 words an hour,
Hmm.
that tells you how many hours I would have written. About 200 hours or so in all, if I've got the math right. But there was, I would say, probably about 5 times that much time that was spent in editing, because every single, once the book was there, came the editing part. And by editing I mean not just cutting out the superfluous stuff, but also bringing life to the dialogues. Because when I was writing my first the draft, the dialogues were there. Yes, I was putting some conscious forethought into the dialogue, but it was also, okay, here's what is happening, and then you move on. It's
Yeah.
when I got back to editing that it felt that the dialogue had to come to life. Some of the, even some certain things, such as, am I using the same adjectives again and again? Can I use a thesaurus? Can I put it to good use and all?
Hmm.
And finally the research was it wasn't done at the beginning and then I wrote the book. I did some research at the beginning, and then as I kept writing, when I would come up on a topic that I thought I needed some more information, I didn't have it, I would go and do the research. So I would probably say if I spent X amount of time on writing, I spent about 3x on editing and about 3x on research. Rough rule of thumb.
That gives me a lot of assurance, Abhinav, because right now I'm handling a historical project about a topic which was not very, which I was not very comfortable with, and I'm afraid 3x and 3x is the time that's working out for me too. So Ram has another question, I guess.
So he asks, you wrote on a topic familiar to you. What are your suggestions, thoughts, and research for a topic that one is not familiar with? Good question. So see, again, the there's going to be a core of your story that is pretty much you can say that will have only a somewhat marginal bearing on the technology or the topic, in the sense there is a protagonist, he gets into trouble, the antagonist comes in and something happens and he comes out of it, right? The good thing is that, again, you have the internet for research, as opposed to say 20 years ago. You were pretty much on your own, unless and until you could find a librarian, you could find another author, you could find a professor who could talk about those things, or you could lay your hands on books on similar topics. Today you have the internet, and I can assure you there is not a topic that you want to write on that has not been described or researched already. So, which is where, if you're writing on a topic that is not familiar to you, I would say your research portion component will probably go from 3x to 5x or more. And make use of the internet, the search, right? Go to Google, go to Bing, or whatever your search engine is, and just type in your queries. Don't worry about getting the right keywords. Just type in the query. For example, a thriller around art theft. What are some of the best thrillers on art theft? And you'll get a ton of hits, and that can become your starting point.
Nice. So the next question again from Professor Ramesh Rao. So for both of you, Sai and Abhinav, you are successful and popular authors, and I'm thrilled. Thank you, Ramesh sir. Have you begun to get an idea about the people and institutions that have been in control or charge of the Indian literary scene? Also, have you thought of working with international publishers for your next novels?
Should I defer that question to you, Sai, since you've published and written a lot more novels than I have? I've written one, and I'm struggling with my second one.
No, I think you'll do wonderfully well because the core thing what is needed for a successful book is a good story, good craft, and a passionate author behind. And Predators and Prey has all the three. So it's a matter of time, I guess. But yes, Ramesh sir, from my experience, it's like I just feel this control slash charge of any industry. Just forget literary scene. I don't think it's a permanent thing. So it's always the greatest consolation is that everything is temporary, and we just have to keep on fighting. And international publishers, I would say. Yes, there are a lot of international publishers who have entered Indian market. That shows the strength of Indian market as such. And a lot of bestsellers within Amazon.in have been those who, which have been written by foreign authors. So I think our target should be to, first uh, pocket the readers, the readily available readers who are comfortable with our socio-cultural elements of India. And that's where Indic Academy is doing a wonderful job of grooming and nurturing these writers who who are very passionate. And do please watch out for our series of anthologies that is coming out. The first one is Unsung Valor. It's a collection of 10 stories from the Kurukshetra battle of Mahabharata, called Unsung Valor. It's been published by Bloomsbury. It's available on Amazon. I'm waiting for my copy of it. So please do check out. And there are three more wonderful anthologies coming out. So do please be a part of follow Indic Academy, follow Indic Book Club everywhere. We have. I am confident we are the game changer that was needed to
Thank you, Sai. I
transform.
think correct. I would agree with everything you said. I would add two more things to it. As readers, right? As readers, we must understand that successful books and authors are not manufactured out of thin air. It is when people like us read and talk and share and tell other people about good books from unknown authors does an author get a chance to find a publisher for the second, third, and fourth books. If everyone thinks this is a great book, I'm sure it'll do well, and if we stop at that, then then we don't change anything.
Yeah.
Uh, from the point of view of a writer, I'd say one thing is when writing a book, when publishing it or whatever, right? My learning as it goes, that everyone's mileage may vary, but my own learning was that keep your ego at the door and then come into the room to write. Uh, because many a time I've seen authors, they fail at basic things such as grammar. And as a reader, there's nothing more off-putting than finding or reading a book with poor grammar. So it starts with the basics. You wouldn't, I wouldn't grab a person off the street who said he was passionate about building buildings and give him the responsibility of designing and constructing my house. So what makes us think that someone who's passionate about writing but doesn't want to spend the time in learning the craft of writing is going to be a successful author or a good author? Successful is different. There are many successful authors who couldn't write if their lives depended on it, but a good author, and we all want to be good. I hope good and then successful rather than the other way around.
Agree with every word there, Abhinav. So our last question, thankfully we have 3 more minutes to answer Anuradha's question of what are the challenges in writing a sequel. And those who have more questions, do please follow Abhinav on Twitter, and do be a part of the Facebook group, Indic Book Club. We discuss a lot of writing related topics as well as Indic civilizational topics, and I'm sure you'd find it interesting. So, Abhinav, about the challenges in writing a sequel.
So thank you, Anuradha. What are the challenges in writing a sequel? I think the okay, I'll not generalize. I'll talk about the challenges that I'm facing when writing a sequel in no particular order. The first one is that the first book got written on the back of passion. There was this fire to write a book and prove a point. The second book will get done only when I put in some process behind the passion. The other point is that a sequel has to have some kind of logical continuity with the first one. It should not, in a manner of speaking, if the first book is set in London, the second one can't begin in Tokyo. There has to be a connection between the two that logically leads the person to follow what is happening. The characters have to more or less be the same. And changes have to be gradual is what my understanding is. And yes, new characters can be introduced, new situations can be introduced, but I think continuity is one of the key key ingredients of writing a sequel. There's one other Q&A from Aparna who asks, sir, what are your target audience and which category did you keep in mind while writing the book? So this is a fiction thriller. It combines things such as conspiracies and technology and surveillance, and its protagonist is an armed forces officer. So that was my target audience. And age group, I think anyone who's 14, 15, 16 years of age and is reading these thrillers, whether it is a Dan Brown, Lee Child, Daniel Silva, David Baldacci, or whoever, they should be able to identify and read this book. And the category, so target audience was this, a demographic, and the category was, wanted to, it's a thriller, it's a techno thriller, I would say.
Okay, so I think we'll just take the last question, and after this, we'll have to close. There is a hard stop. How to manage time jumps and flashbacks? I'm a new writer and get stuck with plot points where I have to make a time jump. So, Sailesh,
So
my answer would be type
yes.
star, 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 and jump the scene.
Yeah, I think one has to. The advice I've read is that one should be careful and avoid time jumps and flashbacks because they can be jarring to a reader. And if you have to introduce them, make them very explicit so that the reader doesn't feel after reading half a page or a page, wait, where is this happening? So, but as a rule, I think a lot of people have said avoid time jumps and flashbacks. So if you have to just maybe very explicit about it so that the reader is left in no doubt as to, you're talking of today and the next page is a flashback, then it's a year back, 2 years back, a month back, just make it very obvious.
Sure. So I think that's about it. Thank you, Abhinav. Got to learn a lot of, uh, a lot from this conversation. I hope the viewers and readers found it as lively and as enlightening as I found it. Keep watching the space. We have many more interesting author Q&A sessions. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Abhinav.
Thank you, Sai. A wonderful discussion, and thank you for for hosting this and asking all these questions. And I hope people like it. And we'll see you and continue the discussion on Facebook on our Facebook
Also
group.
order your copy of this book and leave a review on Amazon, everywhere else.
Yes, very important.
Yep. Sure. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Keep following us.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.